50 years. Nearly 20 emperors assassinated. The Roman Empire, once the most powerful and sophisticated machine in human history, was rotting from the inside out. What causes a superpower to decay? In today's story, we will follow the man known as a restorer of the world, Aurelian, to witness Rome's last and most tragic attempt to save itself after its order had completely disintegrated. The Syrian front, 272 AD. Even for the invincible Roman Emperor Aurelian, the exhaustion was profound. He had just crushed the Goths on the Danube, only to race here without rest. Before him stood the most dangerous and unthinkable of enemies, the army of Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. On the horizon, Aurelian could see the enemy line shimmering with a deadly light. Thousands of Persian-style cataphracts, man and horse in full armor, a moving wall of iron. They were, by common consent, the most powerful heavy cavalry of the age. In the golden age of the Republic, such a challenge was unthinkable. Any provincial governor or client king was a triviality before the might of the Roman legions. But that time was long past, because the very foundations of Rome had been shaken for far too long. This decay is known to history as the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year catastrophe. Its roots can be traced back to a fatal gene planted in the late Republic. The army was no longer loyal to the state, but to the general who could bring them wealth. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon had already proven how terrifying this gene was. More than 2 centuries after his death, with the coming of the 3rd century crisis, the cancer of this gene had metastasized throughout the entire body of the empire. And so, the empire's cancer erupted. In the 50 years between 235 and 284 AD, Rome saw more than 20 emperors. Almost none died peacefully. The vast majority were murdered by their own troops in rebellions and assassinations. They are known as the barracks emperors. Their thrones were bought from their soldiers with money, and their lives could be taken away at any moment by their soldiers' greed. Central authority vanished. The state fell into endless civil war. The borders collapsed as Goths and Franks poured in. The currency system collapsed, with inflation hitting 1,000%. The empire itself fractured, with the Gallic Empire in the west and the Palmyrene Empire in the east declaring independence. And Aurelian, a career soldier with no aristocratic blood, a man who had fought his way up from the lowest rungs of a frontier province, stood upon the bones of his dying empire and made an ironclad vow to use the harshest methods necessary to drag the splintered state back to the path of unity and order. Facing the mighty cataphracts, Aurelian displayed his stunning military genius. As a career cavalry commander who had fought for decades on the brutal Danube frontier, he understood the power of heavy cavalry better than anyone, and he knew its fatal weakness. At the Battle of Imi, outside Antioch, he refused to meet them head-on. Instead, he ordered his own light cavalry to execute a textbook feigned retreat. He lured the cumbersome enemy cataphracts into a long, grueling chase under blistering desert sun. When the enemy's men and horses were completely exhausted and their formation had broken, Aurelian's own legions, fresh and waiting in ambush, smashed into their flanks. This victory was just the first step on Aurelian's path. In a whirlwind 5 years, he achieved the impossible. In the west, he reclaimed the breakaway Gallic Empire, which had been independent for 14 years, without a fight. In the north, he repeatedly drove back invading Goths and Vandals. In Rome, he commanded the construction of the magnificent Aurelian walls. He even used extreme, iron-fisted methods to reform the currency, executing scores of corrupt men officials. He introduced the worship of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, hoping to give a fractured empire a new, unifying soul. Aurelian successfully reclaimed every lost territory. He brought Queen Zenobia back to Rome, bound in golden chains, and held a triumph of legendary magnificence. In that moment, he truly earned his title, Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world. However, while he could stitch the empire's wounds together with force, he could not cure its internal cancer. He faced a far more entrenched enemy, a corrupt military interest group that had long seen rebellion and assassination as a shortcut to promotion. This military group had long adapted to the chaos of the 3rd century crisis. For them, the constant overthrow of emperors wasn't disaster. It was an opportunity for a higher rank and greater wealth. They enjoyed the lawlessness that came with a weak central government and resisted any strongman who tried to restore the old order and discipline. Aurelian's iron-fisted reforms were a direct threat to this military group's very existence. Therefore, the more successful he became, the more of a target he was. In an age like this, a powerful reformer trying to reforge the glory of the empire was a far greater threat and had a much shorter life expectancy than any puppet emperor they could control. In 275 AD, as he was preparing an expedition against Persia, the great emperor was murdered on the basis of minor clerical error in a forged list of officials marked for execution created by his own secretary. A group of his senior officers, gripped by fear and paranoia, conspired and cut him down in his own camp. Aurelian, the iron-fisted emperor who tried to reforge military discipline, conquered the empire's enemies, only to be killed by the empire's own army. His reign was a blazing meteor across the darkest night of the 3rd century crisis. With blood and iron, he extended the life of the Western Roman Empire, but he also proved one thing. When an army's loyalty no longer belongs to the state, not even the greatest of heroes can save it from its own self-destructive fate. But is that fate inevitable? Centuries later, George Washington faced the very same test from his own aggrieved officers. It makes you wonder, had he failed, would America have simply repeated Rome's history, descending into its own dark morass of warlords?